Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Tim Burton's Corpse Bride. This was one of those where I really just wanted to check this movie out. Never seen it before in my life. I just wanted to just finally see what this movie was about. Simply, it also kind of fits Halloween, also, like kind of Halloween vibes. I've seen, of course, Tim Burton's Night Before Christmas, and so like I've kind of been fairly familiar with a kind of claymation or stop motion kind of approach to a movie. Um, Really, it seems like this movie was really like elaborate. There was a lot of stuff going on in this film, and I really just kind of enjoyed it. Really, it's a very simple film. Really, just was like okay. This movie was to have won me over just because it's simple. So, what is this movie about, just in case no one has ever heard of it in their life and wants it to be explained to them? Like, for some reason, this movie did kind of a little bit remind me of the movie Monkey Bone for whatever reason. Um, but yeah, but there was some kind of like some familiar vibes of this movie. Um, as far as music goes, like it's either kind of take it or leave it. I think reasonably, I probably could have liked maybe one song out of all the songs in this movie, and it's probably the one where Emily is to eventually have this little song with the maggot and the Black Widow, and she's to mention how um, like if she is to like stab herself, like she can't feel the pain, but like there are things about her that are real and stuff like that. Some ballparkingly somewhere into that vicinity of that song is something that I do enjoy out of the whole combination of things, because it kind of reminds me of the song in Night Before Christmas, um, the one where I think it's like Amy's song or something like that, where she goes into "It's never to become, for I am not the one." Like it's kind of like that song. Uh, if you, of course, know the Tim Burton Night Before Christmas soundtrack, yeah, that song. The one where she is to kind of be in woes, that character in that movie. So, anyways, maybe at some point, maybe like probably around Christmas, maybe I'll bust out that movie. And eventually, I hope to remember that because it's a ways away, so I'll probably forget it. But I'll probably bring it up. Like, I really wanted to try to bring up some fun Christmas movies that aren't just one kind of theme of like, hey, it's a Christmas movie adjacent, because I don't like to do actual Christmas movies, but maybe I'll come up with some. Um, like seemingly legitimate Christmas movies, even though. So, anyways, so what is this movie about? Let's tee it up for you folks that don't know anything about Corpse Bride. Maybe you've never even heard of it because you've never even seen the movie Mean Girls. Mean Girls weirdly references the Corpse Bride, but it is kind of funny because Lindsay Lohan is to supposedly dress like the Corpse Bride for Halloween, and I don't think she looks anything like the Corpse Bride. I think that they had to avoid making her look like that, so that way they wouldn't have to have paid somebody. Because I think, like in that Halloween party, anyways, they tried to like really cheapen it up. So what is this movie? What is this movie about? Teeing it up. So we end up kind of having a guy named Victor and a girl named Victoria. Kind of lazy, right? Like the female and the male and the female have almost the exact same name. I guess they're really to be meant to be. So this two couple are to be forced into marriage because it's convenient, because reasonably one family is to be really wealthy and one family is to seem like they are wealthy, but actually they are poor, which eventually we'll find out towards the end of the film who that is. So, to kind of keep people on the edge of their seat to figure out who that is. Uh, so eventually there's to be this merge between these two people, and supposedly they end up doing this rehearsal part of this wedding, and all of a sudden it seems that Victor is to be stumbling and fumbling over his vows, and so now he has to go off to practice his vows because he is to really just be like, oh well, like I don't think I can, I don't know if I can do this, I think I might fumble, and because we find out that Victor is kind of a klutz, so yeah, so eventually Victor is to eventually uh, finally be able to perfectly do his vows, but put the ring on the wrong finger, let's just say. That finger ends up to be magically with some baggage on it. Because we end up finding out that finger is to be of a corpse bride that is just to appear out of nowhere, that is to take Victor and take him into the underworld, or the dead world, the world of the dead, and kind of just say that both of them are to be married. And so, like, yeah, I'll basically leave it at that, where it's to be whether Victor is going to eventually go, like, oh, okay, well, I think me and this corpse who's Emily, I think things are going to work out. Or Victor might continue to sneak away onto the earthly realm to eventually get away from this corpse woman. Or eventually there might be a whole kind of story that kind of sneaks its way in, and we eventually will figure out what that story is. And I guess there'll be a good enough thing to just wrap up this film because it's only an hour and 17 minutes. So yeah, so with that said, I kind of like was teeing it up, but I was kind of leaving a cliffhanger there, kind of telling the story, but kind of pulling back because there, in fact, uh, reasonably there has to be something I have to say in spoiler version, right? So let's get into it. Let's go into that double five time, because it's about that time yet again to go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time you do spoil this movie. So let's go into it. So, very beginning of the film, we have both the Van Hort family, or Van Dort. Van Dort. We have the Van Dort parents, the mother and father, who are both to be Nell and William, who kind of burst out of their home to eventually be excited, seemingly, about this marriage, be excited about their son finally getting married, and going off into this horse and buggy to eventually go to this rehearsal. And so then all of a sudden we end up also getting the opposite side of things, where we have both the Evergrutts, who are to be both Modrelin and Fennis. Yeah, they easy names, but then difficult. So they are talking about how they're not happy about this merge, but they actually should be, because we find out in this film that these people are flat freaking broke, and so they should be happy about having their Victoria married into a rich family. So I guess they can be taken care of. So, uh, so they end up going to uh, this rehearsal thing, and so uh, Victor eventually is to be kind of waiting for Victoria. Victoria is just, I guess, get her wedding dress ready, and then eventually is to pop in to speak with Victor, who it seems like neither one of them have ever talked in their lives between one another. Um, Victor is going on and just seeing a piano placed in some part of the room, and so he is just starting to play this piano and just having fun with it. And then all of a sudden, Victoria is to appear out of nowhere and just be like, "Hey, Victor, hey, how's it going?" And so all of a sudden, he gets shocked. He falls over, and then Victoria is to praise Victor for playing this piano and playing it beautifully and whatever. So, cue Victor being a corpse or a corpse klutz, dropping a lot of stuff, dropping everything in sight. So they go into the rehearsal, and so like funny enough, we end up having this pastor, Galswell, who like his voice sounds familiar. I think he's probably the guy who was Dracula at one point in time, and was also the guy from like I want to say it's like Peter Vincent, but I'm not sure of exactly the name. Oh no, wait, no, what am I thinking? Christopher Lee, Christopher Lee. Am I ballparkingly right? The guy from Lord of the Rings, who was yeah. Anyways, pushing on. He was one of those guys. He was not Gandalf, but the other guy. That I always get those confused. Because I want to say Sauron, but I don't think that's right. I think Sauron is the eye and the castle and the whatever. Anyways, pushing on. So, Victor is to do this supposed candle vow thing, and what ends up happening is Victor accidentally lights seemingly Victoria's mother's dress on fire. And so we end up having this Lord Barkis come in and is to douse this flame with some wine. And so Barkis is to come into this wedding, and Finis and his wife is to just to mention like, hey, whose side is Lord Barkis from? Like, is he on the bride's side, groom's side? Like, who is he from? But Lord Barkis is to, I guess, be a con man that is to basically marry off women who are wealthy, to kill them off shortly thereafter that, and then steal all their money from their family. Is what I'm naturally assuming that this guy goes off and does. So since this guy is now, I guess, seemingly penniless, he is to go after the next woman to try and steal her away, as well as with her family's money. So, so now we have the pastor who's just kind of frustrated with Victor because Victor is stumbling over his vows. And so the pastor is like, Victor, you need to go and you need to practice your vows. You need to go off. So Victor ends up going into these woods and is trying desperately to practice these vows. And then it seems that he ends up finally getting them perfectly, and he ends up putting a ring on what he is to think is some tree branch, to all of a sudden find out really it's actually to be some corpse bride's boned finger. And so that all of a sudden is to have this corpse bride pop out from out of the earth, and to just say that, oh, like, we're married now, we're married, like, you put a ring on my finger, we're married, you said vows, and so, like, we're married. And like Victor is like, what? Like, I know, like, no, I wasn't getting any of that, no. So Victor was trying to run off, and so Emily, who's to be the corpse bride, is to follow after him and then eventually grab him and take him to the land of the dead, or the, like, I want to try to figure out where the heck that they actually are at. Are they at purgatory? Or is it just like their imagination of when you die, you would just be put here into this deathly realm of thing? So Victor is to wake up seemingly in this land where everyone is dead besides him. Hence why I'm like, this feels like Monkey Bone. but I'm not quite sure if that's 100% accurate. So, so Victor is to all of a sudden be traumatized by all these dead people, uh, who are to eventually sing a song about Emily's plight, where eventually it seems that her groom had run off on her, in some way or another, or it's some kind of song kind of mentioning about, what ended up happening to Emily and her groom, and kind of letting us know what had happened through song, weirdly. But I didn't quite grasp everything with this song. I don't know. The song was kind of lost on me. And because I was just kind of interested and I was just so enthralled about the visuals that the song was kind of lost on me. Because we end up having this like one like barkeep that's like just a head and that's it. The thing where it's just a hand, where this guy it's just a head, weirdly, and he's a technical bartender. So weird. So uh Victor is just like, I don't know what this is, but I'm gonna try and scramble and run away. So eventually we really just have it where Victor is trying to sneak off back to the earthly realm because that's technically where he belongs. And so he tries to concoct these plans to eventually try to get back there, because he doesn't belong here. And so eventually Emily just is to be heartbroken about that because she's like, well, why can't he just like love me? Like, why can't like he put a ring on my finger? Like, does that mean nothing? And it's like, well, like it was all a mistake. He didn't know what he was marrying into. Like he didn't know who you were. But when really looking at it, did Victor really know who Victoria was? Probably not. So, but anyways, so Victor is to eventually run off, to eventually bump right into Emily, because like Victor eventually is to try to figure out a way of how to get out of here, but there is no way for him to figure out how to get out of here. And so eventually he just runs right back into Emily. And so like Emily is to just kind of like have him like sit next to her on this bench. And so Victor is like, well, I don't even know who you are. Like, I don't even know your name. And so that's when the corpse bride ends up calling herself Emily because that's her actual name. So Victor ends up kind of getting to know Emily a little bit. It seems that Emily consistently pops out her eye because there seems to be a maggot that is to be, kind of having certain lines or helping, Emily out. We also had this moment where like, Emily was consistently chasing after Victor, and there was a lot of things trying to help her figure out where Victor was and kind of pointing the direction of where he is. And so I thought that was really interesting. And so then eventually Emily does bump into Victor, and so they kind of have this talking out moment. So Victor is to eventually tell Emily that he really wants to go and have Emily meet his parents. And so Victor wants Emily to figure out a way of how they can come back to the surface for Victor to show Emily to his parents. And so Emily's like, well, that's a great idea. That seems even much more of a real legitimate marriage and whatever. So Emily goes to this guy who is to be the elder Gutnecht, who coincidentally I think, the person who ends up doing the voice of this character sounds like Alfred from the Michael Keaton Batman movies, and I'm pretty sure it probably is that guy, but who knows? Uh, Probably IMDb does because I didn't go through the IMDb of this. I'm just going through the character list of stuff because it's a lot easier in an animated thing to just see the characters rather than the actual people who they play. So eventually, what ends up happening is this elder is to eventually go and concoct this, potion which he just drinks, and then what he actually does is he just pops out this egg from this bird and crushes the egg and tosses it onto both Victor and Emily and says, like, if you want to come back to this realm, you need to just say the word hopscotch. So, so what eventually happens is Victor is to scramble not to make it back with Emily to his parents. No, Victor runs off to eventually go to Victoria and says that even much more so now than before, he definitely wants to marry her. Uh, and that they shouldn't wait. So, because weirdly, like Victor is just to be said, like he has bizarrely just had gotten cold feet and disappeared, and so we have the Van Dorts that are going and saying like, well, we'll go and look for him, like give us time, we'll find Victor, and then you guys can get married, and all this will be resolved. So, uh, so eventually what ends up happening is that the Van Dorts go on this horse and buggy ride, and we have Mayphew, who is to be their horse and buggy uh, driver, who accidentally goes and gets run over by his own carriage because he coughs and he passes out, and he gets run over by his own carriage and eventually dies. And so so Victor is going to Victoria and telling him that he loves her, really does truly love her. And then all of a sudden Emily is to come in there like, "Oh, what the heck? Like, oh, so you lied to me? You're swindling me? You just wanted to come back here to talk to this other woman?" Uh and so eventually Emily is to take Victor back to the world of the dead and says hopscotch and whatever. And so Victor is to tell Emily that Victoria is not the other woman, Emily is the other woman, and that this isn't right, that he is like been down here. And again, we have kind of Emily who's like, well, hey, you put the ring on my finger. Does that not mean anything to you? And so eventually what ends up happening is that since Victor is to not be present for this wedding, we end up having Lord Barkish, who is to eventually talk to Victoria's parents and to say like, well, hey, like it seems like this Victor guy like isn't the right guy for Victoria, so maybe I should come in there and I should marry this woman off. And Victoria's parents are like, well, he's wealthy, so yeah, like let's go and have him marry this girl because like he's wealthy. And really, we find out that's not the real truth. So Victoria is to eventually go off and try to figure things out. And so it seems that Victoria is to eventually go to the pastor to try and figure out how Victoria can solve all this, can help Victor, and eventually the pastor just goes and tosses Victoria back to her parents and says that she's talking in tongue, like she's possessed, like there's something wrong with her, and so that's when eventually they break the news to this girl, like, oh, you're just gonna get married to this Lord Barkus guy, and because like I think he's a better fit for you than Victor because he's just run off and whatever. So so eventually what ends up happening, so Victoria eventually is to forcibly be married to Lord Barkus, and the ceremony goes off without a hitch and everything works out. And so Victor and Emily are still like in the underground world, and so eventually Emily is just kind of brokenhearted because Victor doesn't like probably won't see her as like his best choice to be bride because she is not alive. Where really Victoria is to still have a heartbeat and still have any number of things, which will make her a much more interesting mate, let's just say. And so eventually, this Black Widow that is to appear, and this maggot are trying to help Emily be in better spirits. That maybe she does have something that Victoria still doesn't have, um, but really, Emily is to mention that she, even though she gets stabbed in the heart and feels no pain, and like any number of things, that she still has something real to offer. So eventually, what ends up happening is that the elder is to come to Emily, and Victor is to hear all this. And so the elder is to tell Emily, well, here's the thing. Victor can actually be legitimately married to you because technically Victor is still alive. So if Victor is to die, and because technically, like, they're parted by death, because technically Emily is to be dead, so like they are technically parted by death. Like when you say like and death do us part in the whole marriage thing, like technically she is dead, so that's why they should be parted. If both of them were dead, then they wouldn't be parted. Which means like basically like their marriage doesn't quite work because Emily's dead and Victor isn't. So considering they're not the same, the marriage doesn't work. So the elders to mention that the only way for Victor to actually be legitimately married to Emily is to eventually go to the earthly realm and to eventually do the ceremony again, have Victor take this poison, and then eventually they can be married and have that all work out. And Emily's like, well, I can't force Victor to take this poison, die, and be with me forever. That doesn't seem right. And I can't do this. And so that kind of nice little part where Emily's not going to try to trick Victor is really interesting. So Victor is like, well, you know what? Fine. Like I will go and do this ceremony, and I will die, and then we will be together. So like this will all work out. And so really at first, like Emily's like, okay, this is great. So they end up going off, and so everybody from the world of the dead comes back to the earthly realm, and so all of a sudden, people who have been dead for a numerous amount of years are all of a sudden reuniting with their past loved ones or their family, and so on and so forth, which is really cool. I really love that. Where eventually we get this spot here where a grandfather is to be reunited with his grandson, or a an old lady is to be reunited with her love that ended up dying for from the last 15 years. Like I really liked that moment where we mix up kind of the living with the dead, and like those spots were really just so fun of people getting terrified of seeing like certain kind of characters mixing it up with the living. So all of a sudden we end up having this of course the pastor eventually is like, hey, no evil, come here and whatever, and so all the evil just goes right into the church and doesn't attack him at all, and he's like, okay. So all these people end up going into the church, or all the dead ends up going into the church, and eventually what ends up happening is that they end up starting to do this ceremony. And so all of a sudden we end up having Victoria that ends up kind of like appearing into the church, and then kind of sneaks and tries to like watch this whole ceremony be put together. And so all of a sudden we end up getting to the part where Victor is going to drink this supposed wine, which is really to be poison. And so once he is to start to consume it, almost, Emily is to stop him and be like, you know what, I can't do this. Like this isn't right. Like if anything, like Victor, like you still have so much life to live, and like I just can't take that from you. And so Victor is like, what are you talking about? So all of a sudden we end up having Lord uh, Barkish come into this wedding and is to just be like, like, hey, isn't this great? And so we end up finding out that Lord Barkish was actually formerly married to Emily, but Emily died. And so really Barkish was to like eventually kill off uh, Emily, I guess in the same way he was planning on killing Victoria, but he didn't quite get to that yet. So now we end up finding out what really happened for Emily to have died, and so I thought that that was really fascinating. So eventually Barkus is to stupidly enough go on and just to eventually be drinking this wine, which he I guess really doesn't realize that it's poisoned, and so all of a sudden he is just like and so all of a sudden he is to die, and we end up having all these characters that are dead going and taking him into a room and torturing him, and to basically say that that guy is going to be the new arrival within the world of the dead. So eventually, Emily is to tell both Victor and Victoria that they deserve one another and that they should be together because Emily has uh, has Victor live up to his promise that Emily would be set free, and because of Lord Barkish getting killed off, and to seek revenge on that whole situation, Emily ended up becoming free to go and live on to the afterlife, which I'm assuming is to be heaven. I'm naturally assuming. So all of a sudden, Emily is to all of a sudden turn into these butterflies, and I guess to fly into the sky, and so all of a sudden both Victor and Victoria are are to just like, well, I guess we're gonna get married then, and maybe they're gonna get like a rush job or something like that. Because eventually, I think Emily had supposedly run off with Lord Barkish to eventually just elope, and I guess that was a big mistake because I guess Barkish went off and killed Emily shortly thereafter. So maybe that's what Victoria and Victor will do. Will kind of rush job it and just elope, so that way they can quickly get married. But who knows? So because they didn't finish that part, I wish that they would have finished them getting married, and like they would have called it a wrap. Or it would have been really interesting if we would have found out that Victor was dead the whole entire time and we didn't realize it because like we would have maybe thought that this guy was alive the whole time, but then we would have found out that oh no, he is actually dead because he fell and slipped and whatever because he's a klutz. Or we would have found out maybe any number of things which would make Victor dead, which I think that would have been an interesting story, but I guess it didn't play out that way. Um, so yeah, with that said, I think I covered most of this movie in a very rushed like fashion. There were some details and some stuff, some music that I didn't talk about, which is bound to happen. I kind of rushed the ending too, but hey, like I got the main points down to this. I enjoy this movie. It's an enjoyable film, but other than that, yeah, it's probably going to be a one-off viewing, probably, because I don't think I'm ever going to go back and rewatch this film, just because it's like okay, seen this, and it was like an okay deal, but it was also like it really felt also like a one-off piece that I'm not going to go back and rewatch again, because it doesn't have that rewatchable value to it, like probably a Nightmare Before Christmas would have, or like some other thing that's kind of like this. It kind of feels like a one-off thing. Like maybe things like Coco would probably have like some rewatchable value, but like this movie just doesn't. because it has a lot of like one-off things that just don't make it to be appealing again. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.